The evening light is turning golden over the Nile, that soft, honeyed light that transforms everything it touches into something almost dreamlike. We can imagine the great river flowing as it has always flowed, carrying its precious water through the desert, bringing life to the narrow strip of green that is Egypt. And somewhere along this river, in one of the grand estates or perhaps in the palace itself, a woman is preparing for the evening. A woman whose life exists in the spaces between, neither wife nor servant, neither free nor enslaved, but something altogether more complex. She is a concubine, a word that carries so many assumptions, so many misconceptions. But the reality of her life is far more nuanced, more interesting, more human than the simple label suggests. Tonight, as the sun sets and the evening rituals begin, we'll drift through her world, exploring the quiet details of her daily existence, the textures of her life, the rhythms of her days and nights in the household of a powerful man. Let us begin, not with drama or sudden change, but with the slow, inevitable process of how she came to this life. Perhaps she was quite young when she first entered this household, maybe 14 or 15 years old, an age when the Egyptians considered a girl to be approaching womanhood, ready to take on adult responsibilities. Her arrival would not have been abrupt, not like being torn from one life and thrust into another, but rather a gradual transition, carefully managed, gently orchestrated. She might have come from a family of modest means. Perhaps her father was a minor official, a scribe in the provincial administration, or a skilled craftsman whose work was valued but whose income was limited. When the opportunity arose, when it became known that a great household was seeking new concubines, her family would have considered this carefully. It was not a decision made lightly, not a matter of simply selling a daughter, but rather a complex negotiation involving honor, advantage, and genuine concern for her future welfare. The Egyptians did not view concubinage the way we might imagine. It was not inherently shameful, not necessarily a mark of degradation. A concubine in a wealthy household might live better than a wife in a poor one. She would be fed well, clothed appropriately, protected from want. And unlike a slave, she retained certain rights, certain protections under law. Her position was ambiguous, certainly, but ambiguity is not always the same as powerlessness. We can picture the day she first arrived at the estate. Perhaps it was during the inundation season, when the Nile had risen and the fields were flooded, and there was less agricultural work to be done. The great house would have been busy with its usual activities, servants moving through courtyards, the sounds of kitchen work, the smell of baking bread, incense burning in the household shrine. She would have entered through the servants' entrance, perhaps accompanied by her mother or an aunt, carrying a small bundle of her possessions, her few personal items that would help make the transition easier. The head of the household's female quarters, perhaps the first wife, perhaps an older concubine who had earned a position of authority, would have received her. This initial meeting is crucial, establishing the dynamics that will shape her entire life in this place. The greeting would have been formal, but not unkind. The Egyptians valued order, proper behavior, the correct performance of social rituals. She would have been shown respect appropriate to her new position, neither elevated beyond what was proper, nor degraded below what was acceptable. Her quarters, these are important to understand. She would not have been given a room in the main family areas. Those spaces were reserved for wives and children. But neither would she sleep in the servants' quarters. those crowded, communal spaces where household slaves might rest. Her room would be somewhere between, modest but private, small but her own. Perhaps it opened onto a minor courtyard, one of the many small outdoor spaces that characterized Egyptian domestic architecture. There would be a bed, a proper bed frame with legs, not just a sleeping mat, a small chest for her belongings, a window, small and high, that let in light and air while maintaining privacy. The first days and weeks would be a time of learning, absorbing the rhythms and expectations of this new life. She would need to understand the household hierarchy, who held power and who did not, whose favor was important, whose instructions must be followed. The relationships between the existing concubines, if there were others, would be complex. Sometimes there was genuine friendship, women supporting each other in their shared situation. Sometimes there was rivalry, competition for the master's attention, jealousy over perceived advantages. Most often there was simply coexistence, women whose lives intersected but did not deeply intertwine.
As she settles into her life, we can observe the gentle routines that structure her days. The household wakes early, as Egyptian households always did, rising with the sun to make the most of the cooler morning hours. She would be awakened by the sounds of the house coming to life, the soft padding of servants' feet, the clatter of vessels being prepared for the morning meal, perhaps a cry of a baby from the family quarters. Her morning ablutions would be careful, thorough. Cleanliness was important to the Egyptians, not just for practical reasons, but for spiritual ones as well. She would wash with water brought to her room, or perhaps she would go to a bathing area, somewhere semi-private, where the concubines could attend to their personal care. The water would be cool, refreshing in the already warming air. She might use natron, that naturally occurring salt the Egyptians used for cleaning, mixing it with oil to create a cleansing paste. Her skin would be treated with oils after washing, protecting it from the dry air, keeping it soft and supple. Her hair requires daily attention. Egyptian women of any status paid careful attention to their hair, styling it, oiling it, sometimes braiding it in elaborate patterns. A concubine needed to look attractive, to maintain her appeal, but not to outshine the wives. Her grooming had to strike a careful balance, being well presented without seeming to overstep her position. She might apply kohl around her eyes, that distinctive Egyptian eye makeup that was both cosmetic and practical, protecting the eyes from the sun's glare and from flies. Breakfast would be simple, bread and beer, perhaps some dates or figs if the season was right. She might eat alone in her room, or perhaps with other concubines if the household had several. These shared meals were opportunities for conversation, for the exchange of information about the household's mood, about what the master or mistress might want, about small pleasures or concerns. The talk would be low, gentle, the unhurried conversation of women who have time but not complete freedom. After the morning meal, her duties would begin. These varied depending on the household and her particular skills. Many concubines were expected to be productive, to contribute to the household's functioning. She might be skilled at weaving, spending her mornings at the loom, creating the fine linen cloth that Egypt was famous for. The work would be rhythmic, meditative almost, the shuttle passing back and forth, the slow growth of the fabric, the gentle clicking sounds that marked the passage of time. Or perhaps she had other skills. Some concubines were musicians, trained to play the harp or the lyre, to sing songs that entertained the household. If she had this skill, her mornings might be spent in practice, keeping her voice supple, her fingers nimble, maintaining the ability that made her particularly valuable. Music was deeply important to the Egyptians. used in religious ceremonies, in celebrations, in the simple pleasure of evening entertainment. A concubine who could provide this was fulfilling an important role. She might be skilled at cosmetics and perfume making, tasks that required knowledge of herbs and oils, understanding of proportions and combinations. She would work in a small area, perhaps in a corner of a courtyard, grinding minerals for eye paint, mixing oils with resins for perfumes, creating the small luxuries that wealthy Egyptian women desired. This work required concentration, precision, a steady hand, and a good sense of smell. The midday hours, when the sun was at its height and the heat most intense, were times for rest. The entire household would slow down, retreating to shaded areas, conserving energy during the most uncomfortable part of the day. She might return to her room, lying on her bed, perhaps dozing, perhaps simply lying still and letting the hot hours pass. The sounds of the house would quiet, becoming distant and drowsy, the occasional voice or footstep seeming to come from very far away. These rest periods were important, not just physically, but psychologically. They were times when she could be alone with her thoughts, when she could remember her former life, her family, her childhood. The Egyptians believed that the heart was the seat of thought and emotion, and during these quiet hours, her heart might wander, might feel things she couldn't express openly, might grieve for what was lost, or hope for what might yet come. As the sun begins its descent, as the harsh light softens into something more gentle, the household stirs again. The evening is the most important time, when the master of the house returns from his duties, when the family gathers, when concubines might be called upon to fulfill their primary purpose. The preparation for evening begins in the afternoon, a slow process of transformation. She bathes again, more thoroughly this time. If the household is prosperous enough to have a proper bathing room, she might go there, immersing herself in water that has been warmed in the sun all day. Otherwise, she would wash carefully in her room, using cloths and bowls, paying attention to every part of her body. Cleanliness was not optional, it was expected, required. The master would not tolerate slovenliness, would not desire a woman who had not properly prepared herself. After bathing, she would oil her body, rubbing the fragrant oils into her skin until it gleamed softly in the lamplight. These oils were precious, made from carefully processed plants, sometimes mixed with crushed flower petals, scented with myrrh or frankincense. The application was methodical: arms, legs, torso, taking time to ensure even coverage, to create the smooth, lustrous appearance that was considered beautiful. Her hair would be arranged, perhaps with the help of one of the servants, or perhaps she had learned to do this herself, becoming skilled at creating the styles that pleased the master. Egyptian hairstyles could be elaborate, involving multiple braids, careful pinning, sometimes the addition of false hairpieces to create more volume or length. The hair might be scented with oils, adorned with simple ornaments, beads or metal rings woven into the braids. Clothing. This required thought. A concubine's wardrobe was limited but not negligible. She would have several linen garments, plain but well-made, kept clean and in good repair. The choice of what to wear on any given evening would depend on several factors. What mood might the master be in? What would please him? What would be appropriate given the household's circumstances? If there were guests, she might need to dress more modestly, to avoid drawing attention that would be improper. If she knew he preferred a particular color or style, she would choose accordingly. The jewelry she wore would be modest, perhaps a simple necklace, earrings, maybe a bracelet. These might have been gifts from the master, tokens of favor, or they might be her own possessions, brought from her former life or purchased with small amounts of money she had managed to save. Each piece would be chosen carefully, contributing to the overall impression she wanted to create: attractive but not presumptuous, ornamented but not ostentatious. Makeup application was an art. The kohl around her eyes would be reapplied, making them appear larger, more luminous in the lamplight. Green malachite might be applied to the eyelids, creating the distinctive Egyptian eye makeup we recognize from ancient art. Her lips might be tinted with red ochre, her cheeks touched with the same. The effect was to enhance her natural features, to create a face that was visually striking without being harsh, pleasing without being overly painted. Perfume, the final touch. She might apply a cone of scented fat to the top of her head, as was the Egyptian fashion, allowing it to slowly melt in the evening warmth, releasing its fragrance gradually. Or she might simply apply perfumed oils to her pulse points, her wrists, her throat, the places where the warmth of her body would release the scent most effectively. The smell should be present but subtle, detectable when someone drew close, but not overwhelming from a distance.
And then she waits. This is perhaps the most defining aspect of the concubine's existence, the waiting. Waiting to be summoned, or not summoned. Waiting to learn if tonight she will be needed, desired, noticed. The waiting is not passive, not simple inactivity, but a state of constant readiness, of alertness to any signal that her presence is required. She might wait in her room, or perhaps in a common area where concubines gather in the evening. If there are other concubines, they might pass the time together, talking quietly, doing small handwork, perhaps playing a game of senet if someone has a board. The conversation would touch on many things: household gossip, news from the outside world that has filtered in through servants, memories of their previous lives, hopes and concerns about their futures. The relationships between concubines in the same household were complex, often paradoxical. They were companions, women who shared a unique situation that outsiders could never fully understand. They might comfort each other during difficult times, celebrate each other's small victories, help each other with practical matters. But they were also rivals, competing for the master's attention, for whatever advantages or privileges that attention might bring. A woman who was frequently summoned might inspire jealousy or pity, depending on how the master treated her. Sometimes the waiting would be interrupted by a servant bringing a message, summoning her to the master's quarters. She would rise, perhaps smoothing her garment, checking her appearance one final time, and follow the servant through the house. The walk through the corridors and courtyards would give her time to prepare mentally, to compose her thoughts, to assume the demeanor expected of her. She must appear pleased to be summoned, grateful for the attention, regardless of her actual feelings. Other times, the summons wouldn't come. The evening would pass, the lamps would be extinguished one by one, and she would eventually return to her room alone, undress, and lie down to sleep in her own bed. These nights were not necessarily disappointing. They brought their own form of relief, freedom from the need to perform, to please, to be constantly aware of another's desires and moods. When she was summoned, when she did enter the master's presence, her behavior would be governed by a complex set of expectations and protocols. She would be expected to be pleasing, agreeable, attentive to his needs and desires. But the nature of these encounters varied greatly, both from man to man and from night to night with the same man. Sometimes he might simply want companionship, someone to talk to listen to his concerns about his work, his frustrations with other people, his thoughts about various matters. Egyptian men of the upper classes often had complex, demanding lives, filled with responsibilities and social pressures. A concubine could provide a form of companionship different from what a wife provided, less formal, less bound by the complex obligations of marriage. She could listen without judgment, respond without the weight of shared property and children, coloring every interaction. At other times, physical intimacy would be expected, desired. The Egyptians had a relatively open, naturalistic attitude toward sexuality, at least compared to some later cultures. Sexual pleasure was not considered shameful, not something to be hidden or denied. But neither was it something to be thoughtlessly indulged.
Like all things, it had its proper place, its appropriate context. A concubine's role in fulfilling these desires was acknowledged, accepted, built into the social structure. Her experience of these intimate encounters would depend greatly on the character of the master and on how he treated those in his power. Some men were considerate, even tender, treating their concubines with a measure of respect and care. They understood that pleasure was enhanced when both parties were comfortable, willing, engaged. These men might take time, be attentive to her responses, create an atmosphere that was conducive to genuine mutual enjoyment. Others were less considerate, viewing concubines as objects for their use rather than as people with their own feelings and experiences. These encounters would be more difficult, more something to be endured rather than potentially enjoyed. She would learn to absent herself mentally, to let her body perform its duties while her thoughts wandered elsewhere. A common coping mechanism for those in powerless positions throughout history. Most masters probably fell somewhere between these extremes, sometimes considerate, sometimes less so, their behavior varying with their mood, the stresses of their day, their physical state. She would learn to read his moods, to understand what he wanted on any given night, to adjust her responses accordingly. This emotional labor, this constant attention to another's state of mind, was as much a part of her duties as any physical act. After these encounters, the protocol would again depend on the master's preferences. Some men might want her to stay, to sleep beside them for the night. This could be pleasant, the comfort of another's presence, the warmth of shared sleep. Or it could be uncomfortable, a strange bed, disruptive snoring, the need to maintain appropriate behavior even in sleep. Other men would dismiss her once their desires were satisfied, sending her back to her own quarters. This might feel like rejection, or it might feel like relief, freedom to return to her own space, to relax her constant vigilance. One of the most significant aspects of a concubine's life was the possibility of pregnancy, of bearing the master's children. This possibility hung over every intimate encounter, both as potential danger and potential opportunity. A child could dramatically alter a concubine's position, for better or worse. If she became pregnant, her status would shift. A pregnant concubine required special care, better food, exemption from heavy work, protection from various dangers. The Egyptians valued children highly, and any child of the master, even one born to a concubine, had value. During her pregnancy, she would be treated with more consideration, her comfort and health becoming matters of household concern. The birth itself would be attended by midwives, experienced women who knew how to manage labor, who understood the precarious nature of childbirth in a world without modern medicine. She might labor in a special birthing pavilion, a small structure in the garden or courtyard, open to the air but sheltered from view. Or she might give birth in her own room, transformed temporarily into a birthing space. The process would be supported by the other women of the household, a time when even wives and concubines might come together, united in the common female experience of childbearing. If the birth went well, if she survived and the child was healthy, her position would strengthen considerably. The child would be acknowledged as the master's, recorded in household documents, entitled to certain rights and considerations. If the child was a boy, especially if the master had few sons, this could be particularly advantageous. A concubine who bore a son might find herself elevated in status, treated with more respect, given more privileges. But not all births ended well. Infant mortality was high in ancient Egypt, as it was everywhere in the ancient world. Many babies died in their first year, claimed by diseases, by accidents, by mysterious ailments that struck suddenly and could not be treated. If her child died, it would be a personal tragedy, a grief she would carry. But it might also mean a loss of status, a return to her previous position, perhaps even lower if the master blamed her in some way for the loss. If she bore a daughter, the impact on her status would be less dramatic. Daughters were valued, certainly, but not in the same way as sons. A concubine's daughter would grow up in an ambiguous position, neither fully part of the master's legitimate family nor entirely separate from it. Her marriage prospects would depend on many factors: the master's affection for her, the household's financial situation, the availability of appropriate suitors. She might be married to a minor official, a skilled craftsman, someone of decent but not elevated status. Or if the master was particularly generous, particularly fond of the child, she might be married, well, with a proper dowry, into a good family. As time passed, as she aged, her position would shift again. The Egyptians did not particularly value youth for its own sake, but in a concubine, youth was certainly an advantage. As she grew older, as her physical appeal diminished, she would likely be summoned less frequently, her intimate duties becoming less central to her role in the household. This transition could be difficult, a slow recognition of changing status, of becoming less desired, less noticed. But it could also bring its own forms of freedom. An older concubine who had borne children might transition into a more maternal role, helping to care for her own children and perhaps other children of the household. She might take on more domestic responsibilities, managing certain aspects of household work, supervising younger servants or newer concubines. If she had been skillful in managing her position, in building relationships, in making herself useful beyond her physical appeal, she might attain a position of some authority. An older concubine who was trusted by the mistress of the house, who had proven herself reliable and discreet, might become a valuable household manager, someone whose advice was sought, whose experience was respected. This was perhaps the best possible outcome, an old age spent in security, with a defined role and acknowledged value. Other outcomes were less fortunate. A concubine who had failed to secure any particular position, who had no children to care for her, who had made enemies or simply been forgotten, might find her old age difficult. She might be given minimal support, adequate food and shelter, but little more, left to spend her days in insignificance, waiting for death with little comfort or hope. Some concubines were eventually freed, particularly if the master died and his heirs didn't want to maintain his father's concubines. Freedom in old age was a mixed blessing. Where would she go? What would she do? How would she support herself? If she had been wise, if she had managed to save small amounts of money over the years, if she had maintained connections with her birth family, she might return to them, spending her final years among blood relations. But if she had been entirely cut off, if her family was gone or would not receive her, freedom might mean destitution, begging, a harsh end to a difficult life.
Throughout all of this, throughout the daily routines and intimate duties and long-term uncertainties, she would have maintained some form of spiritual life. The Egyptians were a deeply religious people, and even a concubine, even someone in an ambiguous social position, would have participated in religious observances to some degree. She would have prayed, certainly, prayers for protection, for health, for the safety of any children she bore. She might pray to Hathor, goddess of love and beauty, asking for continued appeal, for the master's continued favor. She might pray to Tauret, the hippopotamus goddess who protected women in childbirth, especially if she was pregnant or hoping to become so. She might pray to Bes, the dwarf god who protected households,
asking him to guard her small corner of the great house, to keep evil spirits away from her sleeping place. She might have had small personal amulets, charms that she kept hidden away that gave her comfort and a sense of spiritual protection. These might have been gifts from her family when she first left home, or acquired over the years through various means. An amulet of Hathor, a small image of Tauret, a protective eye of Horus. These objects would be precious to her, touchstones in her uncertain life, physical reminders that the gods saw her, knew her, might protect her even in her humble position. The household would have had its shrine, a place where the family's gods were honored, where daily offerings were made. As a member of the household, albeit a subordinate one, she would have participated in these observances to some degree. She might have been allowed to make small offerings, to say her own prayers alongside those of the family. Or she might have been more separated, observing the rituals from a distance, participating only indirectly in the household's religious life. Major festivals would have broken the routine of daily life, bringing excitement, special foods, a temporary loosening of normal strictures. During these times, the whole household might be involved in celebrations, even concubines joining in the feast, enjoying the special dishes, the music, the general atmosphere of joy. These moments would be precious, rare opportunities to feel part of something larger, to experience community and celebration. The great public festivals, the processions of the gods through the streets, the celebrations at the temples, these she might observe from a distance. A concubine would not typically be prominently present at such public events, but she might watch from windows or rooftops, seeing the statues of the gods carried past, hearing the music, smelling the incense, feeling herself part of the great religious drama of Egyptian life, even from her marginal position.
But perhaps the most important aspect of her life, the aspect that surviving texts and artifacts can only hint at, was her inner world. What did she think about during the long afternoons of heat, during the waiting evenings, during the quiet hours of night? What were her hopes, her fears, her dreams, her regrets? She might remember her childhood, those years before her life's path was set, when possibilities seemed more open. She might remember specific moments, a festival she attended with her family, a day by the river, a conversation with her mother, small incidents that take on greater significance in memory. These memories would be bittersweet, sources of both comfort and pain, reminders of what was lost, but also of who she was beneath the role she had to play. She might think about her family, wondering how they were, whether they thought of her, whether they were proud of her position or ashamed, whether they lived well on whatever payments they received for her placement. If she had siblings, she might wonder about their lives, what marriages they made, what children they bore, whether she would ever see them again. The separation from family was one of the most difficult aspects of her life, a grief that probably never entirely faded. She would certainly think about her future, trying to imagine the years ahead. Would she bear children? Would she grow old in this household? Would she ever know security? Would the master continue to favor her or forget her entirely? The uncertainty was constant, the inability to plan, to know, to have any real control over the trajectory of her life. This uncertainty might breed anxiety, or it might cultivate a form of acceptance, a philosophical attitude that what would come, and all she could do was manage the present as best she could. Perhaps she dreamed of escape, of somehow leaving this life, going somewhere else, becoming someone else. But these would be fantasy dreams, impossible dreams. Where would she go? How would she survive? What other life was really available to her? The constraints were real, the options limited. Dreaming of escape might bring brief comfort, but also pain, highlighting the trap she was in, the lack of real alternatives. Or perhaps she didn't dream of escape at all. Perhaps she had come to accept her life, to find its small pleasures and satisfactions, to make peace with what could not be changed. This acceptance wouldn't mean she was happy, exactly, but rather that she had found a way to live with her circumstances, to survive psychologically as well as physically. This resilience, this ability to adapt, to find meaning and purpose even in constrained circumstances, is one of the most remarkable and admirable human capacities, because even in such a life, there would be moments of beauty, moments of genuine pleasure or peace, a perfect evening by the river, watching the sunset paint the water gold and rose, feeling the cool breeze after a hot day, the satisfaction of completing a beautiful piece of weaving, seeing the pattern emerge exactly as planned, knowing she had created something of value. The taste of a perfectly ripe fig, the sweetness exploding in her mouth, a small, perfect pleasure requiring nothing but presence in the moment. The smile of a child, perhaps her own, perhaps one of the household children who liked her, who sought her company. The warmth of that small hand in hers, the trust implicit in that gesture, the reminder that she was capable of care and love, that she mattered to someone. These connections, however fleeting or limited, would be sustaining, would give her life meaning beyond mere survival. The companionship of the other women of the household, whether wives or concubines or servants, moments of shared laughter, of mutual understanding, of the particular bond that can form between women who share a domestic space. A joke told while working together, a confidence shared in a quiet moment, help offered without being asked. These small acts of kindness would be the threads that held the fabric of daily life together. Music, when it was present, would be a joy. Whether she made it herself or heard it from others, the Egyptian love of music was profound. A song floating through the evening air, the pluck of a harp string, the rattle of a sistrum. These sounds could transport, could create a moment of transcendence, could remind her that life held beauty even amidst difficulty. The gardens, if the estate had them, would be places of respite. Egyptian gardens were carefully tended oases, filled with shade trees, pools of water, flowers, and fruit trees. To walk in such a space in the early morning or late evening, to smell the lotus blossoms, to hear the birds, to see the play of light on water. This would be restorative, a reminder of the natural world that continued its cycles regardless of human drama. There is so much we cannot know about her inner life, about her specific experiences and feelings. The ancient Egyptians left us an enormous amount of material, texts and objects and buildings, but most of this comes from elite males, from the perspective of power and authority. The voices of women are muted in the historical record, and the voices of concubines are almost entirely absent. We can reconstruct the outlines of their lives from legal texts, from household accounts, from the occasional mention in someone's biography or tomb inscription. We can infer from what we know about human nature, about how people generally respond to similar situations. But the specific texture of her thoughts, the particular quality of her emotions, the individual ways she made sense of her life, these remain mysterious, perhaps forever unknowable. This unknowability is itself worth contemplating. How many lives have been lived? How many human experiences have unfolded that left no trace, that are entirely lost to history? Every person who ever lived had an inner world as complex as our own, had thoughts and feelings and experiences that mattered immensely to them. But most of these have vanished completely, leaving not even the faintest echo. And yet, in another sense, we do know her, because human nature, while infinitely variable in its specifics, has certain constants. The need for security, for connection, for meaning, these are universal. The pain of separation from loved ones, the uncertainty of the future, the search for dignity and purpose even in constrained circumstances, these transcend time and culture.
In imagining her life, we are not creating fiction from nothing, but rather recognizing our common humanity, acknowledging that her experiences, however different in detail, resonated with the same fundamental human themes that we ourselves know. And so, as our imagined evening continues, as the lamps burn lower and the night deepens, we can picture her, this unnamed concubine, making her way through her life. Perhaps tonight she was summoned, and now returns to her room, washing again, removing the makeup and jewelry, lying down to sleep. Or perhaps she was not summoned, and sits quietly in her room, listening to the sounds of the house settling into sleep, the distant bark of a dog, the cry of a night bird, the gentle rhythm of her own breathing. Her thoughts drift, perhaps to tomorrow, to the small tasks that will fill it, to the question of whether she will be summoned tomorrow night, to whether there might be a letter from her family, to nothing in particular. The thinking itself becomes softer, less focused, the boundary between waking and sleeping beginning to blur. She might say a final prayer, a quiet word to Hathor or Bes, or whatever god she feels closest to. She might touch her amulet, that small object that connects her to something beyond this room, this household, this life. And then, slowly, gently, she would drift into sleep, into that mysterious realm where the Egyptians believed the soul could wander free, where dreams might bring messages, or simply escape, where for a few hours she could forget her position, her duties, her uncertain future, and simply exist in the timeless space of sleep. The house around her sleeps as well, the master in his quarters, the mistress in hers, the children in theirs, the servants in their communal spaces. The household gods maintain their vigil, Bes guarding the doorways, Tower watching over those who sleep, the ancestors whose names are remembered keeping watch from whatever realm they now inhabit. The Nile continues its eternal flow. The stars wheel overhead in their predictable patterns. The night moves toward dawn as night always does. And in the morning, she will wake, and the cycle will begin again. Another day of modest duties and careful behavior. Another evening of preparation and waiting. Another night of sleep and dreams. The rhythms continue, day after day, year after year, marking the passage of her life in the household, creating an existence that is neither completely tragic nor completely content, but something more complex, more real, more human. If we pull back further, looking not just at a single night or a single life, but at the long sweep of time, we can see these concubines as part of the vast human story. Their lives, lived in circumstances very different from most of ours, nevertheless speak to enduring human experiences. The negotiation of power and powerlessness, the search for security and meaning, the creation of connection in difficult circumstances. These are not unique to ancient Egyptian concubines, but are part of the human condition in many times and places. The institution of concubinage existed in many cultures, taking different forms but serving similar functions. It was a way of managing sexuality, of providing companionship, of producing children outside the framework of legal marriage. It was often exploitative, certainly, creating situations where some people, almost always women, had limited autonomy and control over their lives and bodies. But it was also sometimes more complex than simple exploitation, involving real relationships, genuine care, mutual benefit alongside inequality. The ancient Egyptians, in their usual fashion, approached this institution with a degree of legal clarity and social acknowledgement that wasn't universal. They didn't pretend that concubines didn't exist or try to hide them away entirely. They created legal frameworks, however inadequate, that provided some protections. They acknowledged the children of concubines, gave them rights, included them in family records. This doesn't make the institution just or good, but it does show an attempt to manage it with some degree of humanity and order. And individual experiences within the institution varied enormously. Some concubines suffered terribly, were abused, were treated as objects rather than people. Others found ways to navigate their position with some success, built real relationships, new periods of contentment alongside the difficulties. Most probably experienced something in between, lives that contained suffering but also satisfaction, constraint but also small freedoms, sorrow but also joy. As we contemplate her life, this concubine, who lived thousands of years ago, whose name we don't know, and whose face we cannot see, we engage in an act of imagination that is both necessary and limited. Necessary because without imagination, history becomes just a collection of facts and dates, loses its human dimension, fails to connect us to the real lives that were lived. But limited because imagination can only take us so far, because we inevitably project our own assumptions and experiences onto people whose reality was genuinely different from ours. The danger in imagining historical lives is that we might romanticize them, making them either too tragic or too noble, stripping away their ordinary complexity. Or we might judge them by contemporary standards, failing to understand the different contexts and constraints they operated within. Or we might simply get it wrong, imagining a life that bears little resemblance to what was actually experienced. But despite these limitations, the attempt to imagine, to empathize across time, to recognize the humanity in people who lived very differently, this is valuable. It reminds us that history isn't just about powerful people and major events, but also about ordinary people, living ordinary lives, making the best of their circumstances, experiencing the full range of human emotions and needs. It helps us recognize patterns and constants in human experience, even while appreciating historical specificity. And there is something particularly poignant about trying to imagine the lives of those who left no direct testimony, who had no voice in the historical record, whose experiences were never considered important enough to record. By attempting to reconstruct their lives, to honor their existence, to acknowledge that they mattered, even though history largely ignored them, we perform a small act of justice, a recognition of human dignity that was often denied in their own time. The Nile continues its journey through the desert, as it always has, as it always will, until the planet itself changes beyond recognition. The river that she knew, this concubine of our imagination, is the same river that flows today, carrying water, sustaining life, marking the rhythm of seasons with its rise and fall. This continuity across millennia is humbling, reminding us of how brief individual lives are, how many lives have come and gone while the river flows eternally. Along its banks, life continues. People continue to live and love and work and die, just as they did in her time. The specifics have changed enormously, but the basic patterns of human existence remain. People still seek security, still form relationships, still navigate power dynamics, still find meaning in their lives, however constrained those lives might be. The echoes of her experience, of all those ancient lives, reverberate through time, connecting us to a shared human story. If she could speak to us across the centuries, what would she say? Perhaps she would want us to know that her life, for all its constraints, was still her life, that she was not just a victim or an object, but a person who made choices, who adapted, who survived, who experienced the full range of human emotions. Perhaps she would want us to understand the context of her time, not to judge by standards that didn't exist then, but to see her life as she would have seen it, within the framework of what was possible and normal in her world. Or perhaps she would simply want to be remembered, to have her existence acknowledged, to know that someone, thousands of years later, thought about her life, tried to imagine her experiences, recognized her humanity. This desire to be remembered, to have one's life matter beyond its brief duration, is deeply human, something we all share regardless of time or culture. The lamps are burning very low now, their oil nearly exhausted, the wicks barely flickering. Soon they will go out entirely, and the room will be dark, except for the faint starlight that filters through the small window. In this growing darkness, thoughts become even softer, more diffuse, the boundary between thinking and sleeping nearly dissolving entirely. She sleeps, or nearly sleeps, her breathing slow and regular, her body relaxed into the familiar support of her bed, her mind drifting through images and half-thoughts that make no particular sense but feel important somehow. The worries and concerns of waking life recede, becoming distant, unimportant. In this state between waking and sleeping, she is simply a human being at rest, no different from any other human being in any other time, experiencing the universal phenomenon of consciousness fading into sleep. The gods watch over her, or so she believes, and perhaps belief is enough. Perhaps faith provides real comfort, even if its objects aren't literally real. The spiritual framework of her culture, its gods and rituals and beliefs about the soul's nightly journey, these give meaning and structure to the experience of sleep. Transform it from mere unconsciousness into something sacred, something significant. And in truth, sleep is remarkable, mysterious, still not fully understood even by modern science. That we spend a third of our lives unconscious, that our brains continue their complex activity while we're unaware, that we journey through strange landscapes of dream, that we wake changed in subtle ways. All of this is genuinely mysterious, worthy of the mythological and spiritual significance the Egyptians attributed to it. As she sleeps, the night continues around her. Other people sleep in other rooms, each in their own private world of dreams and unconsciousness. The house is full of sleeping people, yet each sleeps alone. Each experiences sleep individually. Even those who share beds sleep in their own separate realities. This paradox of being together yet separate, of sharing space yet having utterly private experiences, this is one of the fundamental conditions of human existence. The stars move across the sky, marking time in their ancient patterns. The Egyptians knew these stars, knew their movements, built their monuments in alignment with them, saw in them the immortal gods and the eternal order of the cosmos. The same stars that shine on her sleeping form shine also on the entire world, connecting all places, all times, in the shared experience of night and darkness and the slow wheel of the heavens.
Time passes, as it always does. Neither quickly nor slowly, but simply inexorably. The deepest part of night, when all is still and quiet. When sleep claims even those who resist it. When the boundary between life and death seems thinnest. This gives way gradually to the approach of dawn. The darkness doesn't lift all at once, but begins to thin, to become less absolute, to hint at the light that will eventually come. She stirs in her sleep, shifts position, pulls her covering closer around her. But she doesn't wake, not yet. The time for waking is still distant, still approaching, but not yet here. For now, there is only the continuation of sleep, the ongoing rest that her body needs, the mysterious process of restoration that happens when consciousness is suspended and the physical organism can attend to its maintenance. Her dreams, if she's having them, are unknown to us. What does a concubine in ancient Egypt dream about? Perhaps her dreams are like all dreams, strange combinations of memory and fantasy, fear and desire, the mind processing its experiences and concerns in that peculiar symbolic language that dreams speak. Or perhaps her dreams are more specific to her situation, shaped by the particular anxieties and hopes of her position, visiting realms we can never access, experiencing things we can never know. The Egyptians believed that dreams could be prophetic, could reveal the future, could bring messages from the gods. They had interpreters who could read dreams, explain their meanings,
advise on what actions should be taken based on what was dreamed. Whether her dreams ever brought such revelations, whether she ever woke with the sense that something important had been communicated to her during sleep, we cannot know. But possibly, probably, she experienced dreams as meaningful, as more than random neural firings, as connected to the larger spiritual reality she believed in. And perhaps sometimes she simply slept dreamlessly, experiencing that pure unconsciousness that is itself a gift, that blessed absence of awareness where nothing troubles and nothing concerns, where the self dissolves into peaceful nothingness. This too was valued, this restful sleep that brings genuine restoration, that allows the body and mind to recover from the demands of waking life. When dawn finally comes, when the sun god Ra completes his nightly journey through the underworld and emerges triumphant once more in the east, when light returns to the world and the new day begins, she will wake. She will rise from her bed, wash, dress, begin once more the routines that structure her days. The cycle will continue, as it has continued, as it will continue, day after day. The eternal rhythm of human life, with its small variations within larger constancy. But that waking is still ahead, still to come. For now, in these last moments before dawn, there is only the deep quiet, the stillness, the peace of a world that sleeps. The house sleeps, the city sleeps, the land of Egypt sleeps along the banks of its eternal river. And in this sleep, all are equal, pharaoh and slave, wife and concubine, child and elder. All surrendered to the same necessity, all experience the same mystery, all participate in the nightly death and resurrection that is sleep and waking. This is perhaps the most profound truth about her life, about all lives, that whatever our circumstances, whatever our position in society, whatever advantages or disadvantages we possess, we all share certain fundamental experiences. We all need food and water. We all feel pain and pleasure. We all seek connection with others. We all sleep and wake and sleep again. These basics of existence, these constants of human life, these connect us across all boundaries of time and culture and circumstance. Her life as a concubine, with all its particular constraints and concerns, was still a human life, still contained the full range of human experience within the specific parameters given to her. She knew joy and sorrow, hope and fear, pleasure and pain, connection and loneliness. She loved and was loved, or perhaps loved and was not loved, or perhaps something more complex that doesn't reduce to simple categories. She lived, which is to say, she experienced consciousness, awareness, the mysterious phenomenon of being, of existing as a thinking, feeling entity in this vast universe. And now she sleeps, as we all sleep, as humans have always slept, surrendering consciousness, trusting in the dawn's return, participating in the eternal rhythm that governs all life. In sleep, she is neither concubine, nor servant, nor anything else. She is simply a sleeping human being, at rest, at peace, journeying through the night toward another day. The story of her life, imagined though it is, reminds us of the countless stories that are lost, the infinite lives that have been lived and forgotten, the vast human experience that exceeds any possible telling. But it also reminds us of connection, of shared humanity, of the patterns that persist despite all changes. We cannot know her, not really, but we can recognize in her something of ourselves, can honor her life by acknowledging it, by attempting to see her as fully human, by including her, however speculatively, in our understanding of the human story. And so we leave her there, sleeping peacefully in her modest room, in that great house beside the Nile, in that ancient world so distant from our own, yet connected to it by the continuous thread of human existence. We leave her to her rest, to her dreams, to the nightly journey that the Egyptians believed the soul undertook. And perhaps, in some sense, in leaving her to sleep, we give ourselves permission to rest as well, to let go, to drift, to allow sleep to come. The contemplation of her life, the gentle imagination of her experiences, the slow, patient attention to detail and texture and possibility, all of this has created a mood, an atmosphere conducive to rest. The story has no dramatic climax, no exciting resolution, no moment of high tension or sudden revelation. It simply flows, like the Nile, steady and continuous, carrying us along on its gentle current. This is as it should be. Not all stories need to excite or shock or thrill. Some stories exist simply to accompany, to create a space, to provide something gentle to rest the mind upon while other processes, the processes of relaxation and sleep, do their work. The story of the concubine, with all its quiet detail and slow development, serves this purpose, becomes itself a kind of lullaby, a narrative that soothes rather than stimulates. The ancient Egyptians understood the importance of stories, of narrative, of the human need to make sense of experience through telling and retelling. Their mythology, their religious texts, their biographical inscriptions all testify to this understanding. They knew that stories shape reality, create meaning, connect past and present, link the human and divine. Perhaps, in some small way, by telling the story of an unnamed concubine, by imagining her life and honoring her existence, we participate in this ancient tradition. We add our voice, however quietly, to the endless human storytelling that spans millennia. And finally, there is silence. Not the tense silence of anticipation, not the uncomfortable silence of awkwardness, but the peaceful silence of completion, of rest, of contentment. The story, such as it is, has been told. The concubine sleeps. The night continues its slow progress toward dawn. And we, whoever we are, wherever we are, can also rest, can allow ourselves to drift, to let go of whatever concerns or thoughts or worries occupied us, and simply be present in this moment, this quiet moment, this moment of peace. The lamps are dark now, entirely extinguished, their oil consumed, their light departed. But it's all right. The darkness is not frightening, not threatening, but simply natural. Simply the way things are at night, simply the context for sleep. We need not fear it, need not fight it, but can accept it, welcome it, rest in it. The river flows, the stars shine, The earth turns, the universe continues its vast, mysterious processes, and we, small and temporary though we are, participate in all of this simply by existing, by breathing, by experiencing consciousness and the lack of it, by sleeping and waking in our endless cycle. Rest now. Gentle rest, peaceful rest, the kind of rest that restores and renews, that asks nothing, that requires nothing, that simply is. Rest in the knowledge that morning will come, that the sun will rise, that life will continue, but that for now, in this moment, there is only the quiet, only the darkness, only the peace, only the gentle drift into sleep, into dreams, into the mysterious realm where the soul wanders free. Good night.